Welcome to Litsoc. It's Thursday afternoon and it's quite light outside at 16:17, and today we are celebrating somebody who's not English but whose 400th birthday occurs this year. If I asked you ladies to name a French author, never mind about who we're talking about today, but can you name me any French authors? Lulu. Victor Hugo. Can you tell the others what he wrote?
He wrote Les Mis and he wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Who's seen the musical Les Miserables? Right, well, there we are. You've seen a musical written by Victor Hugo. Yes. Have you seen the film The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Disney? Eloise, you have. Yeah?
It's the best film ever.
Yeah, so you've seen something based on a French author. Anybody else? Victor Hugo?
I've read a book series, it's about this, it's like little kids book, but I only know the illustrator. I can't remember the author's name. It's about a little boy called Nicholas who goes to school and gets up to all sorts of trouble. The illustrations are by this guy called Senpei. He's worked with New York Times, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. It's definitely a French author because it's been translated.
It was translated
French.
when you read it, right? Yeah.
But it's really cute. It's really fun.
Did anybody have Madeleine the stories as when they were younger? Let's put it like that. No.
Yeah, Sienna.
Yeah.
Sienna's nodding.
Yeah. Sienna's nodding. Lulu. Yeah. No. None of the rest of you. Perhaps they've gone a bit out of fashion. Madeleine's a little girl. Well, a bit younger than you. Goes to a little convent school, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Yes. And it's a film
as well.
It's a movie as well.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
I've seen the movie.
You've seen the movie, right? Well, good.
I think there's a show of it as well.
Yeah, there's an animated series and then there's a film and then the book.
Yeah. So French literature is not a closed book to us. That's great.
No.
Okay. Well, I feel very sort of inadequate, really, because after all, I do not teach French, do I? I'm not a member of the Modern Foreign Languages department, but it's Year 9 Parents' Evening, so I didn't feel I could ask anybody to do this today. So I'm going to do my best, and those of you out there who know more, I'm sure you can tell me by Twitter that I'm not doing a terribly good job. Anyway, it was prompted by this article in The Guardian, which came out. Can you see the headline? Yes, Eloise? Yeah. Okay. Paris's House of Moliere wishes happy 400th birthday to French theatre legend. And this caught my eye because it was on the front page. And I thought, gosh, I haven't thought about Moliere for many years, not since the last time I saw a wonderful version, not in French, at Richmond Theatre, which had been translated and rewritten by the poet Roger McGough, who, even if you don't know the name, you'll know some of his poems. Anyway, the House of Moliere is what's called the Comédie Française. Has anybody been to the Comédie Française in Paris? You're so well travelled, you might well have been. No? No? Okay. It's fabulous. It is like the jewel amongst jewels of theatres. I've been to see a play there. Sadly, it was all mostly in French, so I could only understand a little bit of it. But it's like entering the time of Moliere, which is the 1600s, at the time of Louis XIV. Can you give me the sort of dates of Louis XIV, anybody?
What century do you think that is going to be?
He was called the Sun King.
Is it 17th or 18th?
Well then.
Yep, 17th century. Great big periwigs. No, who's on the throne in England?
Yeah, think about what's going on in the 17th century in this country. The Stuarts.
Big periwigs.
Charles II.
Charles II.
Very
Yes.
famous for that, yeah.
Yeah. He was Comédie Française was not built for Moliere and his plays, but certainly he made the most of it, and he's a very, very controversial, but also in his time, and still can be today, dramatist, in other words, playwright. He is, in France, the equivalent to, who's our amazing playwright? Shakespeare, yeah, absolutely. Because the French language, as spoken by, well, the purest French language, let's put it like that, not the street French language, is called the language of Moliere, which is not quite true, but it sounds good, doesn't it? Okay. Anyway, it's 400 years since he was born, and France are going wild celebrating it. At least parts of France are. Anyway, so they're putting on a new version at the Comédie Française of his very controversial play called Tartuffe, where a homeless beggar is brought in to stay with a quite well-to-do family, and he completely turns the house upside down, and they end up leaving their house, and he ends up taking it over, basically. It's a comedy. Doesn't sound like a comedy, I know, but really it's what we call a satire. In other words, it's making fun of somebody who appears to be one thing but in fact is another, and that's a theme that goes right the way through his plays. Okay, now let me tell you a little about Moliere. Moliere was what we might call an enfant terrible, or the sort of son that no self-respecting 17th century father would want to have, because he started his sort of after he sort of grew up, he was going quite respectable, and then suddenly, a bit like Shakespeare, he changed his life and decided that oh no, I'm not interested in an office job or being involved at the court with a position that is a job for life. I want to be an actor. So he ran away to become an actor. He used his money from his mother. He set up this acting troupe. He became what we call a theatrical manager. Basically, an impresario is the other word, coming from the Latin. Much to the despair of his father, he went bankrupt, and then he was banished from Paris because he didn't pay his debtors. Okay, so you can imagine that dad, not too happy. Okay, so he so right from the get-go, right from here, the moment that he sort of grew up, he was always going to be, he's a bit of a roaring boy. Shakespeare was not a roaring boy. He knew a lot of roaring boys, not least Ben Jonson. But the parallels are quite interesting, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Yes. Shakespeare, of course, left Stratford and a wife.
Yeah.
And a child. We don't quite know why, probably to get away from his father, but also to run away and be an actor. But he came to London. Moliere had to leave Paris and go and become an actor outside the province, in what we call the provinces, which probably did him quite a lot of good. It refined his craft, he learnt to do it properly, and when he came back, he became the favourite of Louis XIV, who was very young. He was only in his 20s, probably seems older to you, but he liked Moliere's style, and there are a number of plays that he really enjoyed, and so he came into favour. So here is the English version of some of Moliere's plays. Okay, sadly we've got them in French, but I didn't get them off the shelf.
Yeah, we've only got them in French.
So I had to. This arrived this afternoon, so you'll have to bear with me as I remind myself. Anyway, we've got The School for Wives. The School for Wives criticised. He wrote that. The Impromptu at Versailles. Tartuffe, The Misanthrope, The Clever Women. Now, I was listening to a talk last night on the radio, and they were all women, interestingly, all women academics, who were very much in favour of Moliere and his style and how important his plays are. But they were talking about, the last thing they talked about was, how can you understand them now? Are they all still relevant? And Liz Lockhead, who's a poet from Scotland, she has translated and adapted a couple of his plays. She said, "Oh no, well, School for Wives, not sure," and a couple of the other academics, no, it's too controversial now, because the heroine, or the female hero, I should say, main character in The School for Wives, is a very young girl, but she's presented as very stupid. She is being courted by a much older man. Now, I agree, this doesn't sound like, you could do much with it. However, the person who wrote this, Maya Slater, who wrote this, actually said, well, her character develops, and he falls in love with her. She becomes more than a match for him. So there are lots of different readings of this playwright, okay? Not necessarily one person's idea is not necessarily going to be the same as others. Anyway, I'll tell you a bit more about him. He wrote at a time when the Académie Française, which had been created about probably a generation before, had laid down rules for culture in France. Now, we have a British Academy, but it's never worked like that, not ever. It's promoted culture and speak in talks and lectures and things. We have the Royal Society of Arts. We have all our learned societies for science. Do you know any of the learned societies for science that you can go and see lectures and talks and things? Royal Institution, that's right, yeah. Did you watch them?
Christmas lectures.
Yeah.
Those lectures? They were good, weren't they?
Yeah, I found it interesting with how they had like the sniffer dogs, and they showed how I don't quite remember what it was, but I think it was like something to do with how all the dogs are different, but only so the thing was to show how coronavirus had like, I think it was like almost like a key almost to get into the cells, and they showed how only one dog will be able to actually get in and like get the treats. I found it really interesting.
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
with, like all the and also because it was about coronavirus, it was really relevant.
Yes.
Well, very true. Very true.
It was excellent this year, wasn't it? I mean, it was really relevant and up to date, and they usually try that, but particularly, especially as it's one of our government scientific advisors. He's now retiring, but yes. So we got our learning institutions, but they don't impose things in the same way that the Académie Française does. And the Académie Française was set up by Cardinal Ruschlow. You heard of Cardinal Ruschlow? Anybody? Lulu? No? Sienna? Well, if you'd Cardinal Ruschlow he's a historical character. He was an advisor to Louis XIII, and a big noise in the church. He would wear his great big red robes and his little skull cap, and in Alexandre Dumas' books about the Three Musketeers, All for One and One for All. You heard of the Three Musketeers, ladies? Yes? Okay. He is their enemy. He is bad news, isn't he? He really is bad news. But it just shows that you can't... there's always two sides to people, okay? Without the Académie Française, French culture might have gone a different way, but certainly it's looked after all sorts of things. Anyway, the Académie Française, in order to make the theatre respectable, because as you know, because you've all studied Shakespeare, the theatre was not respectable in the early 17th century. Okay, everybody was rogues and vagabonds, and the moment that anything happened, what happened when the plague came? What did they do? Just like with coronavirus.
Yeah, what would you do?
They closed the theatres.
They closed the theatres. Okay. Also, when Cromwell came and decided that Christmas was off the calendar, what else did he close?
Shut down.
He shut down the theatres, yes, because they're all a load of rogues and vagabonds, and they have ideas that people will get above their station. It all changed, of course, when Charles II came back to the throne, and he brought to England exactly what he'd found in exile in France. So that's how our theatre changed, because it was influenced by France. However, to get back to Moliere, everybody writing for the theatre had to write in a certain style. It didn't matter whether it was tragedy or whether it was comedy. They had to write in a particular way of writing, and it had to rhyme in rhyming couplets, and it had to have 12 syllables in the line. Okay, what did Shakespeare write in? Anybody remember?
Yes, Lulu.
Lulu.
Can you say it louder for the benefit of the
Iambic
mic?
pentameter.
Iambic pentameter, and how many syllables in the line?
Come on, the rest of you should know, right?
9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
I want to make a guess. Is it 9?
To be or not to be, that is the question.
There you go, you can just count that out. Count out the syllables.
10.
I counted 11.
Same. It must have just been the words.
Shakespeare's usually iambic pentameter, so it's and it goes da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Evie, do you remember me, Emily, do you remember me teaching you this, like the heartbeat?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, because you have to walk with it, right? 5 stressed, 5 unstressed. Now, if there are 11, usually there's something going on in the line. He wants to say something important. This quite often happens. Okay, but in French for French dramatists, and this is not just Moliere, this is people like Corneille and Racine, who were his immediate predecessors. They had to write, or they wouldn't get on the stage. Okay, so we were writing under those sort of conditions, which is sometimes could be onerous, sometimes could be a challenge. Okay. So here's an example. This is from Tartuffe, and this is Orgon, who is the owner of the house, and he's explaining how Tartuffe, the homeless person, came to be. Now, bearing in mind this is a translation, okay, so it's not going to be as, harmonic as the French, all right? But the translators had to essentially follow the rhyme scheme. Look, what you heard has really happened, I'm afraid. You see how all my kind concern has been repaid. The man was destitute, and so I took him in. I fed and housed him, treated him like my own kin. I showered him with favours every day. I planned to give him all my worldly goods, my daughter's hand. Meanwhile, this monstrous rogue, this fiend upon my life, conceived the project of dishonouring my wife. Now he's not satisfied, we foiled his first attempt, and now he holds my goodness to him in contempt. And what's the use the weapons I put in his hand? By trusting him too much to bring about my end, I've transferred all my wealth to him, and he's about to leave me as he was when I first helped him out. So it's a bit rough and ready, but nonetheless we've got the regular rhyme every 2 lines. Okay. Yes. Even if you've got dialogue, it's still got to be in the same way. Okay. So can you imagine writing like that to the order. I mean, it's amazing when Shakespeare does it, but to do this because you have to do it. Shakespeare chose to do it because it was the part of the tradition. But this, you know, if you didn't do it, you couldn't appear. Your plays could not appear in the major theatres of Paris. Okay.
Tedious.
Sorry.
It sounds tedious to write.
You could argue it's tedious, but I think Moliere's a person who would find it as a challenge, and he's the sort of person who would find it exhilarating. It's that discipline, because as somebody who clearly had been, because he'd been an actor, he worked with the rhythms a great deal. I was watching a programme which was on over the weekend with Sir Anthony Sher, who's just died, one of our major Shakespearean actors, and his husband, Sir Greg Doran, who's the director of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. And Anthony Sher was saying, this is a while ago, this interview, but that he was taught and learnt how to speak Shakespeare by the people who were in the main company. And so, although Moliere sort of had, to some extent, taught himself, by acting, he'd learnt. So in a way, it became second nature, I think. Obviously, I don't know because I can't talk to him, but that's the case. He is adored in France, certainly by the people who go to the theatre. He also made a great deal of money at the time. He really courted controversy, Tartuffe particularly, because Tartuffe is he pretends that he is virtuous, that he is sometimes he's presented as a priest, sometimes he's presented as a monk, sometimes he's played as in Britain he's been played as a Muslim imam, also as a sort of cultural guru,
sort of like venerated religious figures.
It's a
sacred
that's right.
cow almost.
Yes,
at this time, to
indeed.
sort of like send up people like this.
Yes, and the Roman Catholic Church in France really objected. So he courted it. It meant that he really, it was dangerous, but he with the power and the patronage of the king, he managed to keep from being imprisoned and executed. Okay, so Tartuffe is just one of them. We've also got one of his other classics is a play called The Miser. Now, year 8, you've studied Christmas Carol. What's a miser?
Very usually referred to as an old person who's quite grumpy and miserable, and often doesn't like, well, in Scrooge cases, he doesn't approve of Christmas.
Yes.
So it doesn't so often only has doesn't really believe in sort of fun in a way, and kind of puts their attention all into one thing. In Scrooge's case, work, basically.
Yes.
But also kind of hoarding money, but not really spending it because they love money so much.
That's right. Yes. I mean, of course, with Scrooge, we only surmise, don't we, that he's got money, because Fred tells us you're rich enough. And of course later on we see his generosity, don't we? In the Moliere's play The Miser, we've got he uses classic, what's quite interesting is he uses classic stereotypes that came from the Italian comedy dell'arte. So we've got an old man who is the miser. We've got a group of servants who are quite badly treated but are a lot smarter than he is. We've also got really stupid servants as well who had no education. Then we've also got, did you do good commedia dell'arte when you did drama?
I didn't do drama.
No, who's done drama here? You're all doing drama. You haven't. Have you done any work on commedia dell'arte with masks and things?
Don't think so.
No. Okay. We've also got two very young lovers. One is the daughter of the miser, and the other is his secretary. Isn't that right?
I'm not familiar with the miser. So.
His secretary. He works for him. Okay. Now, what's the classic Shakespeare plot where the lovers are separated? Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is basically what we've got. They're desperately in love, but the problem is that as father doesn't understand love because he's too old, and also he wouldn't want to pay for a wedding. And also, daughter should be marrying whom? Not somebody who's working for a father, but whom? A rich person, because he can add to their wealth. Yes, okay. And Radio 3 did a new production, and it was broadcast on Sunday night. And Toby Jones, you won't necessarily know the name, but you will know the face. If I'm going to show you a photo in a minute. He played the miser, and they're getting ready for a party. Now, this sounds weird. I know misers don't tend to have parties, but he's also a social climber. Unlike Scrooge, he wants to go up in society. So he's having all these guests, okay, and one of the scenes is instructing. Sorry, Emily, did you want to say something?
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Instructing his closest servant how to dispense the wine. Don't go round too often. In fact, don't go round with the bottle until people ask you. And don't go around with the bottle until people have asked you 5 times, so that you seem really stupid, but also because otherwise the wine's going to disappear and it's going to be used, and of course that way he's going to pay for it. Servant says to him, do you want me to wear my normal clothes? What a strange question, he says. Yes, but I've only got this one uniform, and I spilled things over it when I was looking after my wife as she was dying. Oh, in other words, he's only got one uniform, and he's treated very badly by his master, but he couldn't afford to have a doctor in to look after his wife. No, don't worry about it, says Toby Jones. In the part, he says, just put on an apron. It'll be fine. He also wants the servant to get rid of the guests early. He's quite happy to have them, but he wants them to go early, because if they go early, what will that mean?
Like less food and wine and stuff is drank and eaten, so he doesn't have to spend that much money. Absolutely. So we've got two things going on. We've got a father who is social climbing, and then we've got the lovers who are in classic commedia dell'arte fashion, are at odds. They're quite often at odds with each other, and they're also at odds with the older man. So we've got we've got this also these very smart servants who can always run rings around their master, and then there are others who can't. So that's just a couple of examples. He is done occasionally in this country. There hasn't been a new production for a bit now. There was a production of The School for Wise at Birmingham. There was a production of Tartuffe that toured a few years ago. Michael Billington in The Guardian was lamenting the fact that nobody's done it for a while, because he reckons that it's good value. But his plays have very large casts, which is a factor. So, for example, in The School for Wives, we've got 10 characters. Now that's quite a lot these days. It's not so much if you're
doing Shakespeare and you're in a subsidised company like the Royal Shakespeare Company or the National Theatre, but for a touring company that's quite a lot, especially as you can't necessarily double parts up. So that's probably why we don't see them, a great deal of them. The other thing that Moliere's revolutionary for, in some ways even more so than Shakespeare, is he's very meta. When Shakespeare is writing in terms of imagery, a lot of his imagery comes from his own life, so his country life, but also life as a theatre practitioner. So, for example, when we've got the soliloquy in Macbeth, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more, that's directly taken from his own experience as an actor and watching actors on the stage, even sometimes clearly not in the Glow because that didn't have lighting, but somewhere else, either in Hampton Court or in Lord Strange House in Lancashire or in the Blackfriars Theatre, because it's light and shadow. Moliere is even more thinking about what happens. He wrote this play called The Impromptu at Versailles, and it's all about how you play in a play. Impromptu is a sort of you could describe it as a sort of one-off. You know how Year 9 did play in a day.
I wasn't there for that.
You weren't there for that, but
They did do it. Yeah.
they did do it.
It was activity week. Yeah.
Yeah, an activity week. You're in the process of doing something, but you have to do it very quickly, like an improvisation. Do you know what I mean by improvisation? Yeah. Okay. All right. So he writes himself a character, and he's called Moliere. So it's about putting on a play. So one of the characters is Moliere, a ridiculous marquis. Okay. Obviously, Moliere was a playwright. He wasn't a marquis, which is a degree of nobility, even more important in France than it ever was here. Anyway, so this is scene one. Scene one: Moliere alone, speaking to his fellow actors off stage. Come along, ladies and gentlemen. What are you playing at? Taking so long? Will you come here, all of you? To hell with a lot of them. Hey there, Monsieur Brecourt. Brecourt's off stage. What is it? Monsieur Lagrange. What is it? Monsieur. They're all off stage. So he's centre stage, shouting at his actors or his fellow man of quality, ridiculous marquis. I'm trying to get you on stage to talk about it. So we've got Moliere in the part of Moliere, but not Moliere itself, putting on this performance in the same way as was happening in the court. Quite often, the nobility would do plays, usually written by somebody else, not necessarily by Moliere. And we had the same thing happening in Shakespeare's time at Charles I's court. It got to the point where people had to start writing plays for aristocrats to take part in. We can see that in The Tempest. Okay, and this is how not to put on a stage. So, you know the play that goes wrong, the magic show that goes wrong. All those are sort of the same meta, putting on things. It's out of that tradition. But Moliere did it first, interestingly. And he also puts his lover on the stage too in a part, Mademoiselle Béjart. If you were really so terrified, you'd been more careful. You'd never have agreed to put on the play in 8 days. Well, what was I to do? It was by royal command. Now, this is, you have to imagine that this is going on a stage in Versailles, the great big palace that Louis XIV built outside Paris. Okay. Moliere's writing this play, and it's going to be played in front of the king. Okay, so they're discussing what he's literally writing, it's a series of boxes. So this is what we call meta theatre. Okay, if you do drama later on, you'll study it. Okay, it's like in Jane Eyre, where she's talking directly to the reader. Reader, I married him. She is aware of what she's doing, but she's being written by, who's the author of Jane Eyre? Good girl, Charlotte Bronte. Yes. Okay. So what we call the fourth wall in theatre is broken down here, and it's even more bizarre because Moliere has cast himself as Moliere, but he's a nobleman. Okay. So he's revolutionary. He is worth pursuing. He's worth watching. He's also very, very naughty. There's lots of sexual innuendo. Yeah. There's lots of making fun of the upper classes, making fun of the middle classes, making fun of actors. He doesn't care. He'll make fun of it. Making fun of the church, and all in the most beautiful verse and French imaginable, which I wish I could speak to you. Yeah. But I can't.
As you said, it does lose a bit in translation.
It does lose a bit in the translation. It was when I saw Tartuffe by Roger McGough, because he'd worked from a translation and then he'd used his own poetic. He's wonderful, sort of streetwise poet. It worked. It really brought something extra special to it. Okay. And this is what the Comédie Française and what France are getting very excited about, the 400th birthday of Moliere. I hope I've done him a bit of justice. If you want to, the equivalent sort of here at the same time was what we call restoration drama, and they were very similar in their use of fun and wit and comedy. Sheridan, Goldsmith, they are our equivalents. And as I said before, Charles II came back from exile and he revolutionised the drama because the French had done it first. Now, in Shakespeare's time, who could play on the stage?
Men only.
Men only. When Charles came back, all right, he had one particular actress in mind, Nell Gwyn, but nonetheless, he had experienced for 20 years, going from a young man to an older man, looking at French actresses. What's the problem? Okay, came back, it changed. And also the design of the theatre changed. So Moliere's theatre came here. Now, Richmond, think of Richmond, yes. We've got a stage and an arch, yes, which is utterly different from the globe. Okay, Richmond's design, it was created in the early 1900s, is what we call Proscenium Arch. It mimics Roman, doesn't it, Lulu? Yes, and Greek. But it was forgotten during Shakespeare's time because they were basing their design on the inn yards, okay, where people came to see the plays that toured around. When Charles returned, the Globe had been torn down, theatres had closed, they were rebuilt, and the designs we have in the West End today. So, Theatre Royal Haymarket, Royal Opera House. Who's been to Royal Opera House? Yeah. Colosseum. Did you see a ballet? Did you see a ballet or did you see an opera?
No, I've seen it at the Royal Opera House.
Yeah. Her Majesty's, which is where Phantom of the Opera has been on forever. Have you seen Phantom of the Opera, Louise? Yes. Yeah. They're all Proscenium Arch theatres, so they're directly influenced from the Comédie Française. If you ever go to Paris again, we hope, I do recommend going because you can go on tours and things, and it is absolutely exquisite. It is just wonderful, and to see a play there is like touching the 17th century. I saw the Barbara Seville there, which is not as famous an opera as The Marriage of Figaro, but the characters are used by Mozart, and Beaumarchais is again another dramatist that the French have a real love for, another rebel, and although also worked for the king, so worth pursuing. Anyway, there we are. There's Moliere for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Henley. Thank you.